Hello everyone, and welcome to my Soap Twist 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The hospital room was sterile, with harsh, unforgiving white walls that seemed to absorb the weight of every murmured prayer and sob. Sheila Carter remained motionless, her hands quivering and her breath stopped in her throat like a trapped bird. The monitors beeped irregularly, their harsh tones cutting through the cloud of terror that surrounded her. Luna sat on the bed, her fragile figure damaged but breathing, her eyes blinking as she struggled to remain awake. Lee lay still on the cold linoleum floor beside her, her once vivacious presence now unnaturally still. Sheila's heart pounded in her chest, each beat like a hammer against the anvil of her shame. She had not intended for this to happen. She hadn't intended for any of this. It had begun as any other day in Los Angeles, where the sun always seemed to shine too brightly for the secrets that lurked underneath the city's glitzy exterior. Sheila, a lady whose life had been a series of scams and redemption arcs, was attempting to rebuild. She was tired of being the villain, of the gossip that trailed her through the Forrester mansion, of Steffi and Ridge's watchful looks, and Brooke's scarcely veiled disdain. She wanted to show that she could change, that she was more than the destruction she had caused. Luna, the gentle and unassuming Luna, has been an unexpected friend in this quest. The young woman, with her quiet firmness and sincere eyes, had seen something in Sheila that others had failed to see, a glimmer of humanity hidden beneath years of manipulation and despair. Luna had approached Sheila that morning, her voice shaking as she confided in her. Her mother, Lee, had been spinning. The burden of her profession, the Forrester family's demands, and her own unyielding standards had pushed her to the brink. Luna overheard Lee murmuring to herself, her words tinged with paranoia and wrath, accusing Luna of betraying her, of putting the Forresters ahead of her own flesh and blood. Luna wasn't sure what to do, but she trusted Sheila, perhaps foolishly, to guide her through the storm. Sheila agreed to meet them at the hospital, where Lee worked as a doctor. It was intended to be a quiet talk, an opportunity to calm Lee down and assure her that Luna loved her and that no one was against her. But when Sheila came, she discovered Lee in a rage, her eyes blazing and her hands grasping Luna's arms so hard that the girl winced in pain. "You are just like them," Lee yelled, her voice booming along the silent corridor. "You are turning your back on me after everything I have done for you." Sheila attempted to interfere, her voice calm yet forceful. "Lee, let her go. You're harming her." But Lee didn't pay attention. Her rage had consumed her, and she regarded Sheila not as a mediator, but as another adversary. She shoved Luna forcefully, causing her to stumble onto a metal trolley loaded with medical instruments. Luna's head hit the edge, and she collapsed to the floor, blood trickling from her temples. Sheila's universe shrank to a pinpoint. She noticed Luna, still, and something inside her snapped. She leaped toward Lee, not thinking or planning, but simply responding. "What did you do?" She shouted and grabbed Lee's shoulders. Lee fought back, her nails scraping across Sheila's cheek, her power propelled by desperation. They wrestled in a tangle of limbs and fury until Sheila, panicked, pulled Lee away with all her power. Lee staggered backward, her head hitting the corner of a cabinet with a horrible snap. She slid to the ground, her eyes wide with disbelief and then vacant. Sheila stood there, panting, her hands stained with the weight of what she had accomplished. She had not intended to kill Lee. She hadn't intended to do anything except protect Luna. But the reality was a brutal master who had no regard for intentions. Sheila was the one who caused Lee's death. The hospital staff came moments afterward, drawn to the noise. Nurses hurried to Luna's side, taking her pulse, and called for a doctor. Sheila pulled backward, her thoughts racing. She could run and slip into the darkness, like she had done numerous times before. But Luna's quiet sighs silenced her. The girl was alive, and she required assistance. Sheila couldn't abandon her, especially now. She remained, her heart a heavy weight in her chest, as the cops were called. The cops arrived, their expressions harsh and their inquiries keen. Sheila told them everything, how Lee was unraveling, how she had attacked Luna, and how Sheila had only wanted to stop her. However, the truth was a frail thing, easily distorted by perspective. Sheila was a well-known troublemaker, with a criminal record as long as the Pacific Coast Highway. Her explanation seemed like a convenient reason, a means to rationalize a murder. Sheila focused her gaze on Luna, who was now sitting up with a bandage on her forehead. "I'm sorry," Sheila said softly, her voice breaking. Luna's expression was unreadable, a combination of appreciation and dread. She did not speak, yet her silence was more powerful than any allegation. The days after were a whirl of interrogations and frigid jail walls. The Forrestas descended like vultures, their sadness really mixed with their wrath toward Sheila. Steffi spat angry words at Sheila, calling her a monster and a scourge on their life. Her eyes were crimson from crying. Ridge stood silent, his jaw clenched, his belief in Sheila's redemption shattered. Even Brooke, who had previously attempted to see the good in Sheila, turned away, her disappointment piercing Sheila's heart. The journalists had a field day. Sheila Carter strikes again. The headline screamed, portraying her as a cold-blooded killer. The truth, that she had intervened to save Luna, was buried beneath the weight of her history. Nobody wanted to hear about her ambitions or regrets. They needed a villain, and Sheila was an easy choice. Sheila replayed the scene in her cell several times. The thud of Lee's head hitting the cabinet, her body going limp, and blood pooling beneath her. She observed Luna's pale and terrified expression and wondered if she'd done any good at all. Had she saved Luna, or had she caused her more pain? The question gnawed at her like a merciless tormentor, with no answers. Luna had visited her, her eyes troubled and her speech sweet. "I know you didn't mean it," she added, her words a flimsy lifeline. "But she was my mother." The weight of that reality hung between them like an impassable gap. Sheila wanted to reach out and ask for forgiveness, but she felt she had no right. Luna went, and Sheila did not expect to see her again. The trial moved quickly, and the evidence was damning. Sheila's counsel argued self-defense and that she had been protecting Luna, but the jury focused solely on her history and reputation. They didn't see the woman who tried to adapt and acted instinctively rather than maliciously. They saw a murderer and punished her accordingly. As the gavel fell, Sheila felt the weight of her life bear down on her. She desired to be more, to leave behind the gloom that had defined her for so long. But fate seemed to have other intentions. She was led back to her cell, the clang of the door marking the end of her story. Sheila allowed herself to cry in the middle of the night, when the prison was quiet save for distant coughs and murmurs from other inmates. Not for herself, but for Luna and Lee, for the lives she had taken and broken. She tried to save someone, but in the process, she lost everything. And in the end, that was the most heartbreaking narrative of all. Sheila had never considered herself capable of feeling such pain. She had done terrible things in the past, making blunders and committing crimes that left scars on her life and the lives of those she had met with. She had always convinced herself it was all about survival, that the decisions she did were motivated by necessity, love, or desperation. But nothing she told herself could relieve the weight that hung on her chest like an iron stone. She had not intended to kill Lee. It wasn't supposed to be that way. She had wanted to protect Luna, to be the one who finally did the right thing, but fate had transformed her acts into something unrecognizable, crueler than even her most heinous crimes. It had started so suddenly. Sheila had walked into an unexpected but unavoidable confrontation. Lee and Luna stood face to face, their voices crisp, the tension between them cutting through the air. Lee's protective instincts have become stronger in recent months, particularly for Luna. She wanted control, wanted to keep Luna secure from Sheila's influence, from the havoc Sheila always seemed to bring wherever she went. And maybe Lee was correct. Perhaps Sheila should have remained away. But when Luna's wide eyes fluttered with terror, Sheila felt something burn within her. The need to act, intercede, and protect the girl from the storm rising in Lee's rage. It was instinctual, as basic as breathing. Sheila stepped forward, her hands up and her voice shaking as she begged them both to stop. She had attempted to explain and calm Lee down, but words had always been her weakest weapon. The dispute heated up, voices raised, and Sheila struck out in the midst of the commotion and terror. She didn't recognize what she was holding until it was too late. Lee folded as a result of a swift, sharp action and an inadvertent blow intended to shove away. The sound of her body striking the floor instantly quieted the room, and the reverberation etched itself into Sheila's memory. Luna's scream had pierced, shattered, and broken something deep within Sheila's soul. Sheila couldn't stop hearing that cry even after hours had passed. It followed her, haunting her like an unshakable shadow. She had knelt by Lee's side, pressing her hands against the cut, feverishly whispering that everything would be fine. She begged and prayed with a higher force she no longer believed in. But no matter how hard she pressed or how urgently she whispered apologies, Lee's chest remained immovable, her gaze fixated on a distant horizon that Sheila could never reach. Everything had unraveled in a single moment. One life was lost, one daughter trembled, and Sheila drowned in the truth of what she had done. She sat in her car, peering out at the blurred streetlights, hoping she could go back in time and reverse the seconds that had slipped through her fingers. If she could have sacrificed her life for Lee's, she might have done so. Maybe. But Sheila had always been cursed with surviving, with holding on to life no matter how shattered it got. She had always been the one who lived, while others bore the consequences of her actions. And this time, the price was excruciating. The rain pounded harder against the windshield, as steady as a heartbeat. Sheila remembered Luna, sweet, vulnerable Luna, whose tears had soaked her hands as she gathered the girl into her arms after the unspeakable had occurred. Luna didn't want to be comforted or touched by Sheila, but she was too stunned to leave. Her sobs had ripped through Sheila, each one a reminder of the innocence she had sought to preserve but had instead ruined. How could Luna gaze at her again? How could she explain that she hadn't intended for it to happen and that all she wanted was to stop the fighting? There were no phrases or excuses strong enough to hide the fact. She'd taken Luna's mother away. She had severed the only tie that had kept the girl safe. And Sheila knew she would never be forgiven. She drove aimlessly, her mind a tangle of regrets. The streets blurred past in streaks of gray and red, but she saw nothing. In those dying seconds, all she could see was Lee's face, which was shocked rather than angry or fierce. There had been no time for words, no last statement, and no forgiveness. Only the acute agony of betrayal and the peaceful surrender of life slipping away. Sheila's hands grabbed the wheel tighter, as if hanging on would prevent her from whirling, but the spiral was unavoidable. Her life had always been a succession of falls, and this was the most severe one yet. She remembered the animosity that erupted between her and Lee the first time they met. Lee had always seen through her, seeing the danger in her presence and the disarray in her psyche. She had become a steel wall, desperate to keep Sheila out and shield her family from the tempest she brought with her. And Sheila, all her manipulations and plots, knew Lee was right to despise her. But deep down, she had also admired her. Lee has strength, honesty, and the type of love that Sheila had always fought to provide. And now that strength was gone, taken by her own hands. The harsh irony made Sheila's chest ache. Sheila pulled over, unable to drive any further. She finally let out the harsh, jagged sob she had been holding back. She pressed her forehead against the driving wheel, her shoulders trembling as the weight of anguish washed over her. For so long, she had struggled against weakness and any indication of frailty. She had created steel barriers around her heart, convinced herself that emotion was a luxury she couldn't afford. But tonight, the barriers collapsed. Tonight, she was merely a woman drowning in anguish, pleading with the universe for a mercy it would never provide. Her thoughts returned to Luna, and she remembered how the girl had looked at her with wide, shattered eyes. Sheila had wanted to promise her something, anything, that she would make things right, that she would bear the anguish so Luna would not have to. But assurances were meaningless when the damage had already been done. Luna had lost her mother, and nothing Sheila said would ever heal the void. She pictured Luna in the days ahead, her grief hardening into rage, her innocence overshadowed by a tragedy she should never have had to endure. And Sheila knew that if Luna looked at her with anger rather than shock, she would accept it. She would accept the punishment, blame, and fury, because she earned it. The night stretched on indefinitely and mercilessly. Sheila stayed in her car till the rain let up and the city awoke to the sound of early traffic. She did not move. She had no idea where to go, who to turn to, or how to face the world right now. Every road forward felt obstructed by the same truth. She had passed a line that could never be reversed. She had intended to save a life, but instead she took one. And in that awful twist of fate, she had lost her last opportunity at redemption. Still, somewhere deep in her chest, a small, stubborn part of her clung to the memory of Luna. Perhaps she could defend her, even from a distance. Perhaps she could ensure Luna's future, even if it meant sacrificing her own. It was a weak hope, barely above a whisper, but it was all she had left. Sheila had ended one life. Perhaps she could spend the rest of her life attempting to safeguard the one that remained. But as the morning light broke through the clouds, illuminating the damp streets in soft gold, Sheila realized that nothing could ever erase the memory of Lee's last gasp. Nothing could ever clean her hands of what she had done. And so she sat in quiet, a woman damaged by her own decisions, bearing the painful fact that love and protection, when distorted by fear, had become the cruelest sort of loss.